my goal is today is that we'll have the teaching bit for about 10 minutes or so, which is being recorded, as you know. We'll then actually practice the work. So for that, you will be, it's up to you. You can either copy the questions just straight down off Dr. Frost, or you can run off the worksheet, which I've already attached to the scheduled meeting on Teams. Okay, but the questions are quite short. You might just want to write them down. Okay. Obviously, as always, even though the recording will have stopped, I'll still be here live. So any questions you've got, please just unmute and ask me to look at it. And I'll share screen with the questions you're doing so that I can help you with the questions just like we were in class. And as you know, I can then on my second laptop, I can have the Dr. Frost analysis, which is question by question, so I can see how you're progressing with the questions. Now, if we can get most of the people through understanding this, it would be great if we can do a bit of spin the wheel at the end of the lesson, but we'll see how things go. So that's the plan. So today's lesson, we are, that's ready for spin the wheel later. So today's lesson, we are looking at rounding, okay? So rounding is where we shorten the answers. So if you've got very, very long answers, you just round them just so you're getting it pretty much correct. It's not quite precise enough, but it's precise enough enough for our needs. So if you could just write that down as your title, please. That should be 9.1 rounding. So if you're taking notes, which I encourage, then it should be 9.1 rounding. Let's just get a decimal point in there. 9.1 rounding. Okay. So obviously today's date is the 13th. And you can see up there an extract from the scheme of work. Okay, so we're going to be rounding to 1 or 2 decimal places. So there are 2 ways that we can round. Okay, today we will be looking at focusing on the decimal places, and next lesson we will look at it from another way of rounding, which is called significant figures. But today we're looking at decimal places. So if you could put down a subtitle of decimal places, and we will typically be asked to round to either 1 decimal place or to 2 decimal places. So if we just write down, so example number 1, let's see what sort of lag have we got. It's not too bad today. So example number 1, we could be asked to round to 1 decimal place. Okay, so let's say that the original number, the complete number, so the number before we start rounding is, say, for example, 0.64832. Then when we round it to 1 decimal place, we only have 1 number after the decimal point. Okay, so that would be 0.6. So we're just shortening the answer. Okay. So when it says 1 decimal place, can you write down that your final answer will only have 1 number after the decimal point? And we will practice doing those, okay? So we will look at doing those. It's in a bit more detail in a minute, okay? Or you could be asked, so example number 2. Okay, the question, we might want something a little bit more accurate, and it might ask you to round to 2 decimal places. And if we're being asked to round to 2 decimal places, let's say we were doing 0.64444. To 2 decimal places, you would have 2 numbers after the decimal point, so that would be 0.64. So for this one, you're going to have 2 numbers after the decimal points. Now, as always, you may feel that I'm going a bit quickly through your note-taking. That's fine, okay, because I want to keep this part quite short. If you do feel you've got some gaps in your notes, don't worry, because of course the video will come up in a few minutes' time on Teams, and a bit later in the day when I've had an opportunity, I will upload it onto YouTube as well and give you the link to that video on Teams. Okay, the reason I do the YouTube is that it keeps it permanent then, whereas if it's on Teams, the video expires in 21 days, I think. So there you go. You see we've got two numbers after the decimal point. So when it's two decimal places, two numbers after the decimal point. So that sets the scene. Okay, you could be asked to do three numbers after the decimal place, three decimal places, and that would just be three numbers after the decimal point. So a little bit of practice. Now let's say we've got to round all of these to one decimal place. Okay, one decimal place. So we know all of these are going to have one number after the decimal, one number after the decimal point. Okay, now with the first one number after the decimal point. So we are tempted to say that the number will be 2. Now, before we can commit to it definitely being a 2, we need to go and look at the next digit. Okay, so when it's one decimal point, you've just got to go and check, is the next digit sufficiently big that it's going to mean that that 2 has to go up 1 and become a 3. It's either going to be a 2 or a 3. So in your head, you are thinking, is that going to be a 2 or a 3? So our final answer is either going to be 0.2 or 0.3. Now, because that 3 is below 5, you stick with the 2. So you basically got to, is this 5 or above? That's the question you're going to ask yourself. So you're always thinking about the number beyond the number of decimal places you're going to. So here we're rounding to one decimal place, one number after the decimal point. We have to consider the next number. Is that 3, 5 or above? No, it isn't. So we stick with the 2. So our final answer will be 0.2. Let's take the one below that. Okay, so we've got 0.2 as the first two numbers. So in your head, you're thinking, is our final answer going to be 0.2 or 0.3? They're the only two possibilities. You look at the next digit. Is it 5 or above? Yes, it is. So it's not going to be 0.2, it's going to be 0.3. And that kind of makes sense. If you think about it, 0.2386 is closer to 0.2 than it is to 0.3. However, 0.2612 is closer to 0.3. So have a think about the third one. You might not have enough time to write it down, but just have a think. Do you think the final answer, well, first of all, say to yourself, what are the two possibilities for your final answer? What are the two possibilities? Well, it could either be 0.8 or it could be 0.9. They're the only two possibilities. We either stick with the 8 or we round up to the 9. Now, is the next number 5 or above? Yes, it is. So we go for 0.9. And then the final one at the bottom is 0.9198. When we round that to one decimal place, do we stick to the 9 or round up? Well, the next number is below a 5, so we stick to 0.9. Okay, 0.58532 is closer to 0.9 than 0.8, and the final one is closer to 0.9. So, okay, I just want you to just try and do these in your head. All right, and I am just going to just give you a few seconds to think about each one, before I expose the answer. So again, rounding to one decimal place, what do you think these will be? So 5.362, so we're weighing up between 5.3 and 5.4. That will be 5.4. The next one, 7.312. You're focusing in on that 1. Does that mean the 3 gets any bigger? No, it doesn't. So that's 7.3. The next one, yes, we do round up. That will be 12.8. Okay, the next one, 0.283. Do we round that 2 up to a 3? Yes, we do, because of the 8. So that would be 0.3. And that final one, 0.2183, have a think. What's the final answer going to be? Well, that 1 isn't a 5 or above, so we stick with 0.2. So everything we've done so far has been to one decimal place. Okay. What about if we were doing to 2 decimal places? Okay, it's to 2 decimal places. So I want us to go and have a look at some where we're doing 1 decimal place and 2 decimal places. So this one here, okay, I want us first of all just to think about doing it to 1 decimal place. So when we're doing it to 1 decimal place, we know there's going to be 1 number after the decimal point. So we've got to consider the ones in orange, whether we round up or down. So again, this is still 1 decimal place. So we're going to get 6.4, because that 8 is bigger than a 5 or above. We're going to get 17.6. Have a think. We're going to get 5.8. That's an 8 there, sorry, in there. But that 8 is 5 or above, so that 5.384 becomes 5.4. And that final one becomes 2.7. Now this bit is new. We're now going to be looking for 2 numbers after the decimal point. We're doing these to 2 decimal places. So you've now got to go and consider the implication of the 3rd number after the decimal point. These are the ones I've done in yellow. Okay, so we know we're going to have 2 numbers after the decimal point. So with this first one, our 2 possible answers are either going to be 6.38 or 6.39. 2 numbers after the decimal point. So look at the yellow number, the 3rd one after the decimal point. Is that 5 or above? So no, it isn't. So we stick with 6.38. The next one to 2 decimal places. It's going to be 17.56 or 17.57. Okay, it's only the second one that might possibly go up on those. Now, because the yellow one is not 5 or above, we stick with the 6, so that would be 17.56. The 3rd one down, do we stick with that 4 or do we round it up to a 5? Well, we round it up because that was a 6. This 5.384, do we stick with the 8 or do we round it up to a 9? Well, we stick with an 8 because the next digit was not 5 or above. And then finally, do we stick with that 6 or round it up? Well, we round it up to a 7 because the next number is 5 or above. So that's the teaching, folks. Okay, some of you may have seen this before at junior school and be very familiar with this and you'll rattle through the work. Others of you this might be the first time you've seen it and you feel a bit confused at the moment. All right, don't worry if you don't completely get it today. This is a topic we will revisit again and again and again. So I'm just going to stop the recording. Please stay on mute and please don't put your camera back on until I say that the recording has stopped. Oh, so camera off, Poppy, please. And maybe it was off, Poppy. It might have just been my screen had frozen. So I've stopped the recording.